All right, guys. Now we're going to go ahead and cover the deck tech portion of this. We're going to go ahead and talk about the burn deck that we're running right now, and then we'll switch over and we'll talk about Darkview's Death and Taxes deck that he's running right now. So it's a pretty standard burn deck. All the cards you've seen before in Legacy Burn, you're going to see in this deck as well. There's not a lot of creative things that we're really doing right now. If you were part of the Burn Discord, the Legacy Burn Discord, you'll see that about 2 or 3 days ago we were talking about maybe trying a sideboard that didn't care about any of the combo decks besides Storm, and that's mostly just because Pyrostatic Pillar has applications in other matchups as well. But we realized we were shaving down our 70% or so, 80% or so matchups against creature decks by boarding in a lot of combo hate and turning those pretty good matchups into 50-50 matchups, and then in response to trying to make our 30% matchups into 40 or 45% matchups. So I felt that was kind of silly. There's only so much Reanimator and so much Dredge out there. There's a lot more decks that are weak to Volcanic Fallout, weak to Searing Blood and stuff like that, as well as all the tempo that can provide when you've got a creature on the ground hitting them every turn. So, unfortunately for Darkview, this deck list is definitely a little bit better against Death and Taxes than it has been in the past. But that's just how it is. It might end up switching back to more combo hate in the future if we realize there's a kink in this plan right now. But that's what we're running with right now. So I'm running 20 lands. It's kind of just a preference. You can run 19 if you want. We've seen plenty of people do well with 18. What's your opinion, Darkview? How many lands are you running right now?
Right now I'm running 19. I've never felt like, except when you're running the super lean builds, that have like almost no 3 drops anywhere, I really don't like 18 lands. 19 has historically felt pretty good. My version right now is running more like a couple 3 drops in the main and a whole bunch in the sideboard, which is making me wonder if I shouldn't be running either 20th Mountain in the main, a 20th Mountain in the sideboard, or even just like something I was toying around with was a single Caracas in the sideboard, because most of your 3 drops, in fact, all your 3 drops are a generic and double red. So a Caracas could just be a random Miser's anti-reanimator or show and tell item, while also allowing you to cast your 3 drops. But yeah, I think that 19 to 20 is good because we do want a lot of things like Firecraft and Fallout and Vortex right now. So
yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So now you've heard Darkview's idea on that. What is your... I know you're not a fan of Flame Rift, is that correct?
No, I'm not a huge fan of Flame Rift. I generally felt like Flame Rift isn't bad in like a super in a meta that's just full of combo and control. But if you're going for symmetrical spells, I've generally found that Pyrostatic Pillar is just as good against control, and even better against and it also is better against a lot of the combo decks like Storm. And against the combo decks that you would rather have Flame Rift, like Sneaky Show and Reanimator, you're probably not winning those anyway. So I've just never been a big fan of Flame Rift, and it's just awful in the Delver and other creature-based matchups. So
that's true. The reason that I am particularly a fan of Flame Rift is you'll hear me when I'm talking about, just talking to everybody here. When I'm talking about a recurring source of damage from all your cards, and when you look at your opening hand, you kind of have to have that big payoff card, whether it be a Goblin Guide that's going to go the distance, a Swiftspear that's going to be able to hit them a lot and make their blocks really weird, or an Eidolon against someone that's going to have trouble removing it. Price of Progress can be that card. I think Flame Rift kind of straddles that line between being a card that is able to have a high enough impact by itself by doing 4 damage for one card. But at the same time, I mean, it's very asymmetrical. Like you're saying, it's just a beating to play against aggressive decks. But sometimes you're going to have these hands that have 2 creatures, and you play out both your creatures, and they do 1 damage or they do 2 damage, and then they get bolted or fatal pushed. In that instance, it's kind of nice to have Flame Rift as a top deck to make up for that those earlier cards not fulfilling their roles. And that's kind of the idea behind Flame Rift for me right now.
I think that's valid. I mean, and Patrick Sullivan has often put Flame Rifts in the builds that he's posted and played. So it's not. I'm just heavily biased against the card, but there's certainly a good time and place for it, and maybe that place is now. Delver still seems to be a little weak, though it's starting to make a comeback now that combo is starting to kick the control deck.
Right. Right. Well, if you guys will look at the rest of this deck list, like I said, it's very stock. It's a lot of 4-ofs. The only spicy card we have in the main is I'm running 1 Exquisite Firecraft. I've also shaved down a Fire Blast, gone down to 3, probably much to the chagrin of many of the other burn mages in the Discord server, but I've gotten, no pun intended, or perhaps pun intended, burned by Fire Blast too many times to feel comfortable running 4, and that might just be a Modo kind of a thing where, like, oh, of course I'm going to draw my Fire Blast's Modo. I only have 2 lands in play, and you know that, but the card's pretty incredible at racing combo. It's also quite good against Miracles because it's the only thing that they can put on top of Counterbalance is going to be Terminus, right? So it's
I can't think of anything else that they play.
Yeah, and then we're just running the 1 Exquisite Firecraft in the main board as our tech card because it's it seems like we're bringing that in pretty often. And also being able to kill something like a Thought-Knot Seer is kind of nice if they get down an early Thought-Knot Seer. The sideboard, like I was talking about, we're trying to do an anti-creature metagame right now. So we're running 3 Searing Bloods, 3 Volcanic Fallouts. The Volcanic Fallouts are mostly for the Delver builds. A lot of their stuff is going to die to Volcanic Fallout. If they get out an early Gurmag Angler, that's kind of their deck's best start against us that we're not really able to answer very well. So in that case, Volcanic Fallout isn't going to do much for you, but being able to wipe up a Young Pyromancer and all of his little buddies, being able to kill a Delver and more is pretty excellent. Unfortunately, if they're running True Name Nemesis, that's another card that this doesn't hit. But the fact that it isn't able to be countered can lead to a lot of blowout situations. The other upside of the card, if you haven't seen it before, is it does 2 damage to both players, so you're still kind of sticking with that philosophy of Fire of, we want all of our sideboard cards to have the ability to do damage to our opponent. Searing Blood is the other card that we're running. We're not running any fetch lands, so we can't run a Searing Blaze. And Searing Blaze, the difference between Searing Blaze and Searing Blood is becoming less and less as we go through this. The biggest, most important difference is Searing Blood can be countered by them Fatal Pushing or Lightning Bolting their own creature, whereas Searing Blaze will still do the damage to them because they're still a target for the card. 4 Smash to Smithereens. What do you think about that, Darkview? How many are you running right now?
I have not dropped below 4 Smash to Smithereens in a very long time. I think that if Death and Taxes is anywhere to be found, if any of the Chalice decks, like whether it be Eldrazi Stompy, which is ridiculously popular, whether it's Loam, which is pretty popular right now, whether it's Moonstorm, which is coming back, you need to have the ability to answer a turn 1 Chalice, or you are just dead.
Yep. I entirely agree. I think that the big difference that most people are talking about is everyone's running Smash to Smithereens, but people are talking about, are we running 3 or are we running 4? And because there's cards like Trinisphere in the format and cards like Chalice in the format that can just be absolute blowouts that you have to answer, and cards like Umezawa's Jit, Batterskull, stuff like that, where if these cards get on the table, and Batterskull's a little bit less of a thing when you can just Lightning Bolt their core, but if these cards get on the table, you have to have an answer to them or you will lose. And I'd rather come into that one game where I've drawn 3 Smash to Smithereens and only one of them has done something than come into that game where they do have turn 1 Chalice and now I have one less possible live draw out of my deck to get through that. Let's talk about Death and Taxes specifically now. And I definitely want your opinion on this as well. I don't remember exactly what I took out, so don't hold me to this, but I want to talk about generalities. I think in general, I'm going to be taking out Price of Progress against you. I think that a lot of people can see the ceiling of that card and be like, oh, it's very, it has a chance of doing 4 damage, and in some incredible world it might do 6 damage to them. But I think that looking at the ceiling of that and not considering the basement of it is probably wrong. The basement could very easily be it's doing 2 damage or less to them, and that's not what you want out of a 2-mana card that might cost 3 mana because of Rishadan Port or Thalia or just whatever. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I was going to talk a little bit about DNT first, but we can talk about about burn sideboard against DNT. So DNT these days runs very basic heavy. I've not seen a build that has less than 10 basic planes in a very long time, and 12 to 14 is becoming increasingly common. So price progress is quite often going to be a 2 for 2. They can also use Wasteland to basically turn your price of progress into a very cheap double stone rain, which isn't bad, but it's probably not doing what you wanted it to do, which is kill them at that point.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, I agree with that. And the other thing is that because there's always the possibility that DNT is just non-basic enough heavy that price of progress might be there, DNT still has to respect price of progress whether it's there or not, because you don't know whether they've taken out 1, 2, or all 4 copies. And if that's the case, then often you'll leave your wastelands open instead of using them actively just to make sure you don't get blown out by a big price, and thus effectively you're taxing DNT just because the price of progress is phantom presence, even if it's not really there. So yeah, it probably does come out, but it still has an effect just by the fact it exists.
okay. That's actually a really good point. That like the threat of price of progress when they have a Thalia on the board is absolutely brutal, because then you have to hold out that wasteland, and Thalia is already taxing a little bit of your game plan as well. It's like you can't just hard cast equipment. Um, and if you do, you might get blown up by price of progress. So that does add an interesting sub game to your side of the table. I see what you're talking about.
Right. I'm going to be skipping ahead a little bit, but we played a couple of matches already, and we did one in the blind. And in game 2 of that match, without going into detail, one of the things I said over and over on my end was, "This is bad because I don't have basic planes, and if he still has price of progress in, I'm dead to this."
Yeah.
But at the same time, just because of that, it actually made me play less effectively, just because I had to respect it. So you'll see that in game 2 of our first match.
Yeah. So when we did play in the blind, I took out all the prices, mostly because of how good my sideboard is. I brought in 4 Smash to Smithereens, 3 Searing Bloods, and 3 Volcanic Fallouts, as well as a Sulfuric Vortex. Basically as ways to... you can find life gain pretty easily if you need it, and if my cards don't line up well, I can just get overrun. I'm throwing so many burn spells at your creatures because you have a lot of threats that I just have to kill. That I really, really can't afford you to gain any life at all during the matchup. Plus, you're not doing any damage to yourself because of fetch lands. So I think that because of that, it's okay to bring in Vortex. The game is kind of going to go long. If I play Vortex after I've already bolted a few of your things, Vortex is going to be that recurring source of damage. So that was kind of the idea behind bringing that in, and it also stops Batterskull from being as big of a threat, and it stops Jit from, at least a third of its the scariest part of its activation.
Yeah.
So
I tend to agree. Like the way I think about it, and we'll talk more about this in a couple minutes, but when I think about how DNT has to approach the burn matchup, my general philosophy is if I gain 8 life during the game, I'm going to win. If I gain 4 life during the game, I'm probably going to win. If I don't gain any life during the game, odds are that I'm going to lose.
Yeah.
So I think that bringing in all those cards is actually quite good, because again, they all do damage, and you definitely have enough to cut. Because you said you're cutting price, and I agree with that. I imagine that Flame Rift is also, for instance, coming out. I imagine Exquisite Firecraft is probably coming out, and after that, I'm not sure what you cut, but that's 9 cards you're cutting, so that's a lot of room already.
Yep, I did cut. I believe I cut 3 Flame Rifts, Exquisite Firecraft, and a Fire Blast. The reason I wanted to cut Exquisite Firecraft and Fire Blast is solely because of Thalia, basically. Fire Blast, when they have Thalia on the board and you've drawn Landlight, is really awkward. You can really only afford to find 1 against Death and Taxes. I didn't want there to be any possibility of me finding 2. And then Flame Rift, as you said, it's good when it's good, but it has just as much potential of backfiring against you after a certain point. If their cards have lined up well against your cards as the burn player, Flame Rift is going to backfire on you, because they've got so many small creatures and so many ways of outgrinding you that are just blowing you out from various effects, that Flame Rift is eventually going to be way too asymmetrical. You're paying 2 mana or potentially 3 mana to do 4 damage to both of you, and they've got creatures on the board and you don't. Can be bad. I think in game 3, I sideboarded out some amount of Eidolons because you were going first. and I didn't want to get locked into my own Eidolon or to need to top deck something to finish you off. So I think I brought the Flame Rifts back in for game 3 in exchange for a few Eidolons. What do you think about that?
I'm kind of mixed on that. I definitely understand the logic, but I don't think there's many situations where Eidolon is really just a truly disadvantageous play. Like the one thing that can make Eidolon awkward is when D&T has Vile.
Yeah.
So that can definitely make Eidolon feel a little weird. But in general, I like Eidolon better than Flame Rift in the matchup because it's entirely possible in a lot of games for D&T to get pinned in such a way that I'm casting one spell per turn. It's doing it's doing 2 damage to me to begin with, and they're going to answer it and then keep pounding me. So they're going to do another 2 from the Eidolon itself. So Eidolon's now dealt me 4 plus all their creatures, and they've only taken 2, and I'm way behind. Because as always in Burn, it's not your life total you care about; it's the opponent's. And I think that Eidolon is probably a little better than Flame Rift even on the draw, but I can understand the reason to switch it. One thing I do want to say is I really like how you think about like the fact that a lot of your 2 drops are likely to cost 3 and your 3 drops are likely to cost 4 because even though D&T is unlikely to be porting you very heavily because they need to be using their mana so actively in this matchup, Thalia it can just be a major thorn in the side.
Yeah. I realized one of the reasons I brought Flame Rift back in is because I was taking some amount of Lava Spikes out because you had Chalice, and I wanted to decrease the amount of 1 drops I had in my deck and increase the amount of 2 drops so that even if I couldn't answer Chalice right away, maybe I would still have enough damage in hand to be able to cobble together some sort of game plan. So I think that was another thing that influenced me to bring some amount of Flame Rifts back in when I saw that Chalice in game 2.
Yeah, I actually I was losing a game pretty bad. I almost debated not even playing it, but
it would have been a blowout had you not. That's for sure.
Yeah. So should we talk about the D&T side?
Yeah, let me switch over real quick. All right, I'm good to go.
All right. So the way I explain, for those of you who aren't familiar with Death and Taxes, is the short version is Death and Taxes is a hybrid of a white weenie deck with a soft prison or soft control deck. It's not that you have lock pieces like Chalice of the Void and Trinisphere, and then you have big threats like Goblin Rabblemaster or Thought-Knot-Seer. Instead, your disruption is actually stapled to your creatures that tend to be both a little bit weaker disruption and smaller. The way I like to think about D&T is I divide it into several different categories. So on my second slide, let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, there we go.
I have it divided up into several piles, which indicate what they do. So the first pile is job is just lands. The second pile is just your 1 drops, which is just a collection of generally great cards. I'm not going to go into too much detail on each. You've got removal. You have Mother Runes, which can blank all their removal for the rest of the game and put you way ahead if it sticks, which is relevant in the Burn matchup. And you have Vile, which can just allow you to use your mana so much more effectively. But in that third column, which includes Port, Wasteland, Revoker, and Thalia, you have a whole bunch of taxing or disruption effects, which are particularly effective at targeting mana. And because that legacy runs so lean, it's incredibly effective at disrupting your opponent. Burn is actually one of the more resistant aggressive decks towards that tactics just because of how many instants it plays, how many 1-drops it plays, etc. In the fourth pile, you've got 4 Stoneforge Mystic and 3 pieces of equipment. The Stoneforge package is just really effective for fighting and grinding out against decks with bigger creatures, and you can always get the piece of equipment you need. It's not uncommon to play an additional piece of equipment in the sideboard. In the fifth column, you have a value package, which includes Recruiter of the Guard, which can go tutor up, often tutoring up Thalia or Stoneforge or Disruptive Creature. Flicker Wisp can get a lot of value, especially when combined with Vile. I'm not going to go into length about that because there's entire articles written about it. And the sixth column is a bunch of basically bullets that you can get with your Recruiter of the Guard that are all good in different matchups. The sideboard, I like to divide up into having having a removal package, which in my case is 2 Path to Exile, 2 Council's Judgment, and a Leonin Relic Warder, which provides a fairly flexible removal suite against a whole lot of stuff. An anti-control package, which includes 2 Cataclysm. Cataclysms will often be swapped for something like an additional Palace Jailer or a Gideon ally of Zendikar. An extra Recruiter is not uncommon. And the Chalices are actually pretty new tech. They basically weren't played until a few months ago, but basically it was discovered that Chalice is really good against a lot of combo decks where DMT doesn't have a lot of potential turn one plays. You can go for and Chalice on 0 and lock out Petals and Lion's Eye Diamond, things like that. But it also works really well against combo. Incidental casualty of all that, it also works really well against control because you shove cantrips. An incidental casualty of that is also the burn deck because Chalice is just really good against burn. And often Chalice has historically in the past often been things like Aethersworn Canonist and other such Rule of Law style or Arcane Lab style effects. And finally, you have an anti-graveyard package. The things that are most common to change, like I said, the Cataclysms will be swapped for something in the same category. The Chalices will be swapped for something similarly disruptive against combo. Those resting pieces are frequently Surgical Extraction or mixed with Surgical Extraction, and often one of those Path to Exiles or Lean and Relic Ward or something in the same vein. And also that slot of bolts, that last column in the main deck, is frequently changed around a lot. This is a build that I've been playing within 1 or 2 cards for a couple of months. But other than that last column in the main deck, those 6 bullet cards, basically this deck has been the same since pre-banning. Since when I say pre-ban, I mean pre-Deathrite and pro-ban. So if we want to go to the last slide so I can talk about the burn matchup specifically, or should we talk about it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go to that slide. All right. So for the last slide, divide this up. So the way I think about the burn matchup in general is that you're not trying to be more aggressive than them. You're trying to, against a lot of decks, you're trying to lock them down just enough and then beat them to death slowly with your 2 power creatures. Against burn, you're actually just hoping to gain enough life to outlast them, and that's why you basically have to shift into a much harder control approach for the matchup. So you have to think about what's good and bad in that context, because there is no way you're out racing them. And even if they give you Hound with Flame Rift or stuff, it's often not enough. You can't rely on just going after them aggressively. So in the first column is all our lands. You never want to cut lands, because one of the ways that burn will just get you is you just draw too few lands and you're done. In the second column, you've got all the cards that I think are good in this matchup. Mother of Runes on turn 1, if unanswered, blanks all their ability to remove anything forever. Well, not literally. They can overload it, but it's just so powerful in the matchup. Swords to Plowshares you want against their creatures. If an Aether Vial lands and it doesn't immediately get smashed, it can put you so far ahead on mana that you can just dominate the table. Thalia obviously messes them up, especially if they have a land light draw. The Stoneforge Mystic package, and particularly its ability to gain life, is essential to winning the matchup. If you don't gain life, you're probably just not beating burn. End of story. So those are great in the matchup. The Sanctum Prelate is also fantastic, acting as basically a main deck Chalice. There's a few cards that are sort of not as good in the matchup, as sort of medium. Hallowed Spirit Keeper and Flickerwisp and Sword of Fire and Ice are both a little slower than you want, but they're really not that bad. They like Flickerwisp is important because it can blink something like a Sulfuric Vortex to give you an opportunity to gain life with Barraskull or Jit. Hallowed Spirit Keeper, if it can attack and block because of its vigilance, and if it dies, it creates at least 1 and potentially more tokens to allow you to continue to chump block and buy time. And Sword of Fire and Ice gives pro-red. The drawing cards and extra damage isn't actually as relevant, but pro-red can be very important. But it's also really slow because it's going to take you a minimum of 5 mana to get that thing working, and you just often don't have that much to spend against burn. And finally, there's cards that are really bad. Revoker, it basically doesn't hit anything in this matchup that isn't named Grim Lavamancer, and you really don't want to be relying on a 1 toughness creature to beat anything a burn deck is playing, because your 1 toughness creatures are going to live very long. Remorseful Cleric is basically another 2/1 that flies. It's not doing anything else relevant. It's good against graveyards, but not here. Mirran Crusader is really powerful, but you don't want to be spending 3 mana on a card that's just going to trade with a 1 or 2 mana burn spell and then not really contribute anything further, which is why it's out and Hallowed Spirit Keeper is in. Recruiter of the Guard is a 3 mana 1/1 that is really slow. So it's powerful, but it's just too slow to spend much mana for a 1/1. It's just going to get out of the way even if it gets something else. Palace Jailer is not a card you want to rely on because A, it's slow, and B, they have a whole bunch of 1 mana haste creatures. So losing the Monarch against a burn deck is about the worst possible thing I could imagine. And walking ballista sometimes is really good, but usually it's just too slow. Again, it's usually 4 mana before you're using it effectively because all their creatures have at least 2 toughness. So it isn't really the card you want to be playing, though occasionally in edge cases it'll be handy. So basically, those 8 cards you really want to come out, and if you want to sideboard more, depending on your build, some of the cards in the second column might leave as well. So in my particular sideboard configuration, there's 3 Chalice of the Voids, which are an automatic include, obviously. It's just such a powerful card against burn. I'm also bringing in the entire removal package. The Path to Exiles sometimes don't line up well against direct damage heavy draws. So some people don't like including them, but if they have a direct damage heavy draw, you're probably dead regardless of what was in that slot, so you might as well have an answer to something. The Relic Order can answer an Eidolon or a Sulfuric Vortex, and even just doing temporarily, that can matter. And finally, the Council's Judgment Kids are just a generic answer to basically anything. Even though it's slow, being able to clear Vortex is a big deal. And finally, just everything else is just not useful. So what I would actually be doing likely is getting rid of the 8 cards I said before and bringing in the Chalices and then the removal package, and that's just an easy, clean swap.
Yep, I think I agree entirely with that, especially with... I agree with your line of bringing in the Path to Exiles, because like you said, if they just... if you have 1 dead card in hand, that's not why you lost a burn, It's much more important to remove, like, there are annoying creatures like Swiftspear that can be really hard for you to block effectively.
That was definitely in the match that we already played, which we'll see after this. It was definitely, those Swiftspears were definitely giving me fits in game.
Yeah.
So I generally, the way I look at this matchup, historically, before Deathrite Shaman and Probe was banned, I used to say that this matchup was probably favored for burn. Probably like, it was close. I thought it was like 55-45 or maybe 60-40 in favor of burn. But I always said it depended a lot on the particular configuration of the 2 decks. And since Probe and Deathrite Shaman have been banned, the way in which D&T evolved into the new metagame combined with some cards that became available have basically made me think that it's sort of flipped. Because that immediately after the ban, I was playing a couple of Brightlings because there wasn't really a need to play something like to play Ballista and Jailer at that particular moment. And Brightling is just an absolute beating if it hits once and gains you a bunch of life, and that's in the main deck. So you've now got 4 life gain cards instead. 4 life gain cards plus Stoneforge Mystic instead of 2 life gain cards plus Stoneforge Mystic is a big deal, and it's almost impossible to get rid of it. And then later on, as Brightling became worse, almost exactly at the same point, Chalice started getting a lot better, and Chalice is also tough for burn decks. So I think at this point, it's favorable to D&T, but it's not an easily won matchup. It's not even a 2-1 favorite, but it is a favorite.
Yeah, I want to talk about cards from your list as well while we've got it pulled up. That as a burn player, I'm usually scared of cards that have to be answered. Otherwise, I'm gonna have a hard time. So, Mother of Runes is basically the one drop that you have to care about. The biggest thing she does is, like you said, turns off removal for the rest of the game. If for whatever reason I'm pretty light in the hand, or if you're getting low on life, she can also start blocking my attacking creatures. So she's just a lot more trouble than the 3 damage is worth. Basically, she's a creature that has to die. You're usually going to see her early on in the game, and it's going to really start taxing the amount of removal that you've got to throw at Thalia and Stoneforge Mystic, which are the other 2 cards in the deck that can lead to a lot of headaches in the early game. Stoneforge Mystic is another card that you basically are going to have to Lightning Bolt in Game 1, or Chain Lightning in Game 1, or suspend a Rift Bolt for, or use a Rift Bolt on to kill. The reason behind that is most of the time they're going to grab either Batterskull or Jit, depending on the components of their hands. A lot of times it's going to be Jit because it's going to be a lot easier to equip that. And like you said, if you gain 4 life, you win the game. Batterskull is...
4 is more like... 4 is like even At that point, 8 is where I think I win.
Right. And if Jit connects twice or Batterskull connects twice, you're going to get that 8 life, basically. But Jit is a little bit easier to get on the field and get going if I do have the answer to Stoneforge Mystic. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, like they'll see. There's moments where I will grab Batterskull with it, but generally against Burn, I grab Jit first, with one exception. If I either already have enough mana to hardcast Batterskull, or I already have a active Mother of Runes on the table, and it's unlikely that you can fire off 2 burn spells right then to remove both tap the Mother of Runes and then remove the Stoneforge Mystic.
Right.
I'll grab Jit. Okay. However, if I have an active Mother of Runes, I will likely grab Batterskull. If I have 5 or more lands, I will likely grab Batterskull. That's the exception.
That makes sense. Yep. So, and then the last card is obviously Thalia. It just really slows down the pace at which I can play the game. It makes my, in a weird way, it makes my my Monster Swiss Spears a lot less scary because I can't just surprise Prowess Trigger, in combat through, like in game 1 through Price of Progress or through Lightning Bolt or some other sort of instant. But
the Swiss Spear can be hard to block anyway with Thalia, because if you have 2 mana up, you have to respect the possibility that there is a bolt. And if there's 3 mana up, you have to respect the possibility of a whole bunch of different spells.
Right. So from the burn side, main board, that's what I'm usually scared of. And then after I saw the Chalice of the Voids, I was like, oh my, I don't know if I can win this matchup. When I saw this in game 2, I was like, oh my gosh, because now I have to worry about Chalice of the Void, Mother of Runes, Thalia, Stoneforge Mystic, Batterskull, and Jit, and having answers to all of them at the right time. Because if I don't have, I think the thing that Death and Taxes does really well against Burn is you really force me to have an answer. You're the deck that's asking a lot of questions, and I'm the one that has to answer a lot of the stuff that you're doing, or I'll just lose.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic in that respect, that Death and Taxes is very much the control. It very much has to think of itself as the control deck. You're trying to make the game go long and outlast the burn deck, but at the same time, your cards are so powerful that they're the one who has to. That the burn deck is the one that has to answer them. Yeah. And the really interesting thing about having Chalice in the deck was that previously, when Chalices weren't a thing, you would frequently have Vials and the two pieces of equipment as the only thing that might warrant a smash to Smithereens. Now that you have 3 Chalices in addition to that, you effectively have a density of 3 Chalices are must answer, 2 pieces of equipment are must answer, and then 4 Stoneforge Mystics, which get a piece of equipment, are must answer. So you basically have a density of twice as many must answer cards as they have answers to those cards.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting that. The other thing is, a lot of times previously, if I'm going first against you, and I see you play turn 1 Aether Vial, and I've already got my Goblin Guide in play, I'm probably just going to snap Smash the Smithereens at Aether Vial. But now, depending on the contents of my hand, I have to be worried about you going turn 2 Chalice of the Void, because if I have a bunch of 1-drops and my only answer to Chalice of the Void is that Smash, I might have to let you have that Aether Vial for at least another turn before I make any sort of decision. And it's not always a big deal. I mean, Aether Vial in 1 is usually only going to put Mother of Runes in play, but there's a lot more what ifs that I have to think through now that Chalice is in the deck.
Yeah, so that line becomes a lot easier if that last card is Bolt, because that means that you can let another turn go by, bolt the Mother of Runes when it comes in at instant speed, or snap off a bolt in response to Chalice and then smash it the next turn. But yeah, previously it was absolutely the right call to smash that Vial the second you had an opening to do so. And now with the possibility that Chalice may come down, it's a lot more risky.
Sure.